All right, let's pick up on that conversation, Bongiwe, because we are in the realm in which issues around extradition of Ndodana Tshuma have become quite a reality in terms of the conversation between South Africa and the United Kingdom. So let's give you the lay of the land as far as how extradition between these two countries works. But before we get to that, let's start with recapping the sequence of events that ends with Ndodana Tshuma in South Africa and, of course, the burials that have now taken place of Nothabo, Natalie, and Nala. The incidents date back to the 6th of July in 2026, and this is in the area known as Bedford, and it's known specifically as Great Denham in the United Kingdom. Neighbors report that they had not seen the mother and the children for a number of days, and they were concerned. And fast forward to a day or two later, after that, the initial reports that they had not been seen, then that their bodies are then discovered. The property itself is valued at about £1.3 million, and it has, as you can imagine, become the center of attention and also, just known as a center of this horrific triple murder investigation that has now gripped both South Africa and the United Kingdom. Let me tell you then what happens 2 days later after neighbors report that they had not seen the mother and the two children. On the 8th of July, Ndodana Tshuma leaves the United Kingdom. At that point, we're told that he had yet to be flagged as someone who is wanted, and that then happens when that red notice by Interpol is then issued, leading to the South African authorities being alerted that this is someone who is wanted by the police in the United Kingdom, with the result then that he is then arrested in Johannesburg on the 10th of July. Among the charges that he then faces, and we're all focusing on the triple murders that he's alleged to have committed in the United Kingdom, but pay attention to this particular charge, unlicensed firearm in South Africa, because I will tell you a bit later on in this presentation that actually it throws a bit of a spanner in the works for the United Kingdom authorities as far as their quest for justice is concerned, and I'll tell you why in a moment. In fact, let's get to that point. Let's talk about extradition processes. On the 12th of July, Minister Mamulu Kukupai confirms that Tshuma would be extradited to the United Kingdom, or that those proceedings would get underway. And you'll know the role of the Minister of Justice, because we've recently gotten absolute clarity, to the extent that there was ever any doubt, that extradition is an executive act, as opposed to the understanding hitherto that the NPA and other role players would have had, that actually the Director of Public Prosecutions could sign off on an extradition. That has since been clarified in cases including the Cholota case that involved the former personal assistant of the former Premier of the Free State, Murwadi Cholota, was extradited from the United States. And as a result of that, we now have clarity that it's an executive act, and therefore it involves the minister. There will be court processes. The magistrate approves the legal processes and the sharing of the charges that specifically make him a suspect who is wanted in the United Kingdom. But the final say, once all the court processes have played themselves out, will then ultimately be that executive act of the Minister of Justice. Before I get to recent extraditions that will become relevant, let me go back to that point about the charges of a firearm. That's a spanner in the works, I said, because the narrative now is that because he allegedly committed a crime in South Africa, he may have to be, he will have to be prosecuted in South Africa for that, the possession of an unlicensed firearm, which potentially could delay his extradition back to the United Kingdom. It's not certain, it's not cast in stone and done and dusted, but that's the narrative at the moment, the expert narrative that says we have to hold him accountable for a crime that he allegedly committed in South Africa. So let's see how that plays itself out. Let's get to the recent prominent extraditions. Two of them, I want to highlight them because they have to do with the country, the relevant country in question that we are talking about, the United Kingdom and South Africa. These two are important because they established the principle that between the United Kingdom and South Africa, extradition agreement is existent. It exists, and not only does it exist, actually there's precedent of the United Kingdom. Shrin Diwani, you'll remember, was wanted in connection with the murder of his fiancée in South Africa. This was back in 2014. It was a big case in the country. He was extradited from the UK to face a trial in South Africa, albeit in the end, he ended up not being convicted of that crime. Michael Lomas also was sent to South Africa recently. This is over the case at Kusile power station and the construction thereof. So this sets the precedent that between the two countries, the issues of extradition are actually handled. Then there's this case that involves the murder of AKA and Tibbs Mutswane. And the suspects were in Eswatini, and they've also been extradited recently. And it just talks to the processes that are undertaken as part of extradition. But the difficult one that we don't seem to be able to crack as a country, the Guptas, because they went to the United Arab Emirates, and that bid to get them extradited did not succeed. I remember the conversations around that time when South Africa and the UAE were now finalizing an agreement, but it seems it did not come to fruition. Of course, we could add many other cases such as the one in Malawi involving Bushiri, the Bushiris also playing itself out in that country's courts in terms of due process. So that, in a nutshell, is what we are looking at. We still have a long journey to go, but it looks like this in terms of how it may unfold in the country's courts.